My husband was not at my bedside in the maternity ward because at that moment he was in bed with his ex. It was hard for him, but I was in more pain. I was in the last month of my pregnancy, swollen, exhausted, and counting down the days until I could finally meet the little life growing inside me, when my husband Alex came home from work, sat down at the kitchen table, and calmly announced that he had to fly to Los Angeles. I remember the way he said it, like it was just another business trip, like I wouldn't flinch at the mention of her name. When I asked why, he looked at me with a strange mixture of guilt and resolve and said, "Claire just found out she has brain cancer. She doesn't have anyone else. I need to be there." Claire. His ex-girlfriend. The one who still sent him birthday messages, who occasionally liked his posts even after I asked him to set boundaries, who hovered at the edge of our life like an old song that wouldn't stop playing in the background. And now, suddenly she was sick, terminal maybe, and he had already decided that his place was by her side, not mine. Not here with me as I fought through sleepless nights and aching ribs and the fear of labor looming closer by the day. I sat there in silence, staring at him across the table, the baby shifting inside me like it too felt the shift in the room, and I realized in that moment that I didn't recognize the man in front of me, not the way I used to. Because in the space of a single sentence, he had put her need above mine, and I wasn't sure if I was witnessing compassion or betrayal. We had lived together for 5 years, 2 of which we were married, building what I believed was a steady, loving life, full of quiet routines and shared dreams, the kind of relationship you think will hold when everything else falls apart. I thought we had chosen each other for life, not just in the easy seasons but in the hard ones too, the ones that demand presence, patience, and unwavering loyalty. And yet it was in the very moment when I needed him the most, when my body ached from carrying our child, when fear and anticipation kept me up at night, when I felt most vulnerable and raw and in need of his hand in mine, that he decided to go to her. It wasn't just the act of leaving that broke something in me, it was the clarity with which he chose to go, the way he didn't waver, didn't ask if I would be okay, didn't seem to grasp that I was already at the edge of my emotional limit. He simply told me he had to be there for Claire, as if his obligation to her outweighed the vows he made to me, as if love could stretch that far without breaking. And in that moment, I realized he hadn't chosen me, not really, not in the way that matters when life stops being romantic and becomes real and messy and demanding. I knew about Claire from the very beginning, almost as soon as Alex and I started dating, because he talked about her the way people talk about someone who once held their entire heart, carefully, with reverence but always in the past tense. They had been together since high school, the kind of long, formative relationship that stretches through adolescence and shapes the way someone loves. He told me they broke up when she moved to Australia for work, and that the distance had made it impossible to continue. He said it was mutual, bittersweet but final. And when I asked if they still kept in touch, he looked me straight in the eye and assured me that they didn't, that they had both moved on, that it was ancient history. I wanted to believe him, and so I did. But over time there were signs, subtle things at first, like the way his expression would flicker when her name came up in old stories, or how he once hesitated before deleting an email, claiming it was spam when I caught a glimpse of her name in the sender line. I pushed the doubts aside, told myself not to be paranoid, told myself that trust meant not asking too many questions. Still, something stayed lodged in my chest, a quiet unease I couldn't shake. And then, one afternoon while he was in the shower, I saw the message. It was buried deep in his email inbox, a thread that spanned years, the kind of correspondence that didn't happen by accident. They had never stopped talking. In fact, they had grown closer again, exchanging updates, memories, private jokes, and even the occasional late-night message that made my stomach twist. He hadn't just failed to mention her, he had gone out of his way to hide her. He had crafted an entire version of reality where she didn't exist, while in the shadows she had never really left. He left me 2 days before the scheduled delivery, bags packed and flight booked, barely able to meet my eyes as he kissed my forehead like a stranger saying goodbye, not a husband stepping away from the most important moment of our lives. I stood in the hallway after the door closed, surrounded by silence and the half-folded baby clothes we had laid out just the night before, wondering how someone could walk away so easily from something we had built together, from someone who was about to bring his child into the world. I was alone in that house, my belly heavy, my back aching, and my heart completely undone. My family lived across the country and couldn't come until later in the week, so with shaking hands and tears streaming down my face, I called the only person I could think of, his mother Linda. She picked up after just one ring, and the second she heard my voice crack, she didn't ask questions or hesitate. She said, "I'll be there in an hour," and true to her word, she showed up with a grocery bag of homemade soup, a small bundle of lavender in her hand, and a face full of quiet heartbreak. She didn't defend him. She didn't try to explain what he had done. She just took one look at me, at the swollen belly and the red eyes and the trembling lip, and wrapped her arms around me like she was trying to hold all the broken pieces together with her bare hands. And in that moment, it was the first time in days that I didn't feel completely abandoned. Linda was outraged by her son's actions in a way that was both fierce and deeply personal, her anger not loud or theatrical but steady and unshakable, the kind that came from a place of knowing exactly what it meant to be left behind. She had raised Alex without a father, working double shifts and making sacrifices no one ever truly acknowledged, and when she looked at me sitting on that couch with my belly round and my heart shattered, she saw not just her daughter-in-law, but a younger version of herself, someone bracing for motherhood alone when it should never have come to that. She didn't make excuses for Alex, didn't say he was confused or overwhelmed or trying his best. She called it what it was: abandonment. From that day forward, she became more than a mother-in-law. She became an ally, an advocate, a quiet storm that moved behind me when I didn't have the strength to move myself. She took over phone calls when my voice shook, sat beside me at legal consultations, and even brought me folders with highlighted notes and typed lists of questions to ask the attorney. She told me I didn't owe Alex the title of father just because his DNA was involved, not when he had chosen to disappear 2 days before his son entered the world. With her help, I filed for divorce, and together we worked on preparing a legal agreement that would strip him of his parental rights entirely, an act I never imagined I'd take, but one that, with her unwavering support, began to feel not like vengeance but protection. She said to me one night, while folding baby clothes in the quiet hum of the nursery, "You deserve better. And so does this baby." And for the first time since Alex walked out the door, I started to believe that maybe she was right. When I gave birth to our daughter, Alex was not there. There was no nervous pacing in the hallway, no hand to hold through the contractions, no whispered encouragement as I pushed through the most physically excruciating and emotionally overwhelming experience of my life. His absence was not just a space beside the hospital bed, it was a weight on my chest, a hollowness that pulsed louder than the monitor beeping behind me. I tried calling him once, in a moment of weakness and hope, when the early labor pains had started to tighten across my back like a belt, but his phone was turned off. Just a dull, final voicemail message that felt more like a door slamming shut than anything else. So I did it alone. Linda was there, holding my hand through every wave of pain, whispering soft words I could barely hear through the haze of exhaustion and tears. And then, after hours of pushing and panic and that quiet, sharp moment when the room went still before the first cry rang out, I held my daughter against my chest for the first time. She was tiny, red-faced, blinking at the world with the kind of fragile trust that cracked something wide open inside me. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that she was mine and mine alone. A few hours after giving birth, while the nurses cleaned up and the sky outside began to turn that pale morning gray, Linda handed me a pen and the stack of divorce papers we had prepared together. My body still ached, I could barely sit up straight, but my hand didn't shake. I signed every line, every page, every ending, and it was, without question, the most painful and at the same time the most powerful act of my life. I was bleeding and broken and reborn all at once. And I didn't cry when it was done. I just looked down at my daughter sleeping against my chest and whispered, "We're free now." Alex returned when the baby was already asleep in the cradle, her tiny chest rising and falling with the soft rhythm of a life that had just begun, completely unaware of the chaos and betrayal that had preceded her arrival. He walked in like nothing had happened, like he could just slide back into the story he had walked out of, his face a mixture of guilt, nerves, and something resembling hope. I was still in my hospital gown, propped up on pillows, my body sore and my heart armored, and when he moved toward me, arms outstretched like he was going to hug me, like he had any right to touch me after everything, I pushed him away without a word. He looked startled, his mouth opening to say something, but before he could form a sentence, Linda stepped out from the corner of the room where she had been quietly folding a blanket. She walked up to him with a calmness that only made what followed more powerful, her heels clicking softly against the hospital floor. She held the divorce documents in her hand, folded but firm, and without raising her voice, she threw them straight into his chest, the papers scattering slightly before landing at his feet. "Get out," she said, her voice steady and cold. "You are not needed here anymore." Alex just stood there for a second, stunned, eyes darting from her to me, then over to the cradle where his daughter slept, completely untouched by his presence. He tried to speak again, but Linda didn't flinch. She didn't let him take a single step further. And in that moment, with her standing between us like a wall he could no longer climb, I saw something crumble in him. Not regret, not love, just the realization that he had lost something he could never earn back. Then he turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him, and the room exhaled without him in it. He tried to shout as he reached the hallway, his voice rising with panic and desperation, calling my name like it still belonged on his tongue, demanding to know why I was doing this, why I was shutting him out, as if he had forgotten every moment he chose someone else over the life we were supposed to share. He asked to see the child, begged for a chance to hold her, to meet his daughter, to be part of something he had abandoned without hesitation. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't let the sound of his unraveling pull me back into the chaos he'd created. I walked to the doorway, stood tall despite the pain still heavy in my body, and looked him in the eyes with a calm that came not from anger but from clarity, and I said, "You made a choice. I don't owe you anything more." My voice didn't shake. My heart didn't waver. Because in that moment, I wasn't speaking as the woman he had left behind, I was speaking as the mother of a child he would never deserve to know. And when I turned and walked back into the room, leaving him standing there with nothing but the echo of his own regret, I didn't look back. Not even once. The next morning he came again, this time looking disheveled and hollow-eyed, his face streaked with tears as if misery alone could rewrite the past and soften what he had done. He stood at the edge of the hospital room, barely inside, his hands shaking as he begged for a chance to explain, swearing over and over that nothing had happened with Claire, that it wasn't what I thought, that he had only gone to help her because she was scared and alone. He said he had made a terrible mistake, that he panicked, that he didn't know how to juggle everything, but that he never stopped loving me, never stopped planning to come back. His voice cracked with every plea, as if grief could somehow serve as proof of innocence. But I didn't believe a word of it. His sudden guilt, his trembling voice, his carefully crafted remorse, all of it came far too late, and none of it could erase the cold finality of what he had done when I needed him most. I sat there in silence, holding our daughter in my arms, the warmth of her tiny body pressed against mine like a shield, and I watched as the man who once promised to protect us unraveled under the weight of his own cowardice. And then, as if the universe needed to twist the knife one last time, I discovered the message. A single screenshot forwarded to me by a mutual friend who hadn't known the full story, a photo of a text exchange between him and Claire, buried among the chaos, but clear enough to burn. They had kissed. It was there in his words, casually admitted, an afterthought, a moment he hadn't thought would matter because he believed I would never find out. And in that moment, everything hardened. Not just the pain but the resolve. Because now it wasn't just abandonment. It was betrayal. And there would be no coming back from that. Not ever. He said that he had stopped the moment himself, that he pulled away before it went any further, and then, without even a hint of irony, he looked me in the eyes and said, "It proves how much I love you." As if restraint after betrayal could somehow be rebranded as loyalty, as if the fact that he paused before destroying everything completely was supposed to be a gift I should unwrap with gratitude. He stood there so certain, so desperate to be redeemed by his own restraint, not realizing that the damage had already been done long before lips ever touched. But for me it was the last straw. Not just because of the kiss or the lie or the arrogance of thinking I'd take him back out of pity or love or some hollow version of forgiveness. It was the way he tried to twist betrayal into proof of devotion, the way he reached for justification instead of apology, the way he still centered himself even in the ruins of what he had broken. I looked at him and saw someone I no longer knew, a man who couldn't even recognize the difference between regret and responsibility. And in that moment, something inside me quietly closed for good. I decided then and there. No more explanations, no more half-truths, no more justifying the pain he caused or softening the consequences of his choices. I was done offering him understanding that he had never earned, done bending over backwards to preserve a version of reality where he wasn't the one who walked away. I retained full custody of our daughter, not out of spite, but out of instinct. The pure, unwavering need to protect her from a man who couldn't even stay present when her life was just beginning. If he finds it hard to live without her, if the silence of not being included in her first steps or her birthday candles or the sound of her laughter begins to eat away at him, that is not my burden to carry. It is the natural consequence of a choice he made freely. He turned his back on her before she had even opened her eyes, and now he has to live with what it means to miss what you abandoned. I won't rewrite the story to make him feel better. I'm writing it now for her, and this version doesn't include lies. But Alex didn't give up. When guilt and begging failed, he turned to something uglier. He started blackmailing me through his friends, weaving a new version of the story where he was the victim and I was the cruel, vindictive mother using our child as a weapon. It started with a single message, then another, and soon my phone was flooded with dozens of texts and DMs from people I barely knew or hadn't spoken to in years, all accusing me of manipulating the child to punish him, all insisting that I was keeping a father from his daughter out of spite, not protection. The language was eerily identical, worded so precisely, so deliberately, that it didn't take long for me to realize they were following a script, one I was certain he had written himself. They told me to be the bigger person, to stop making this about revenge, to think of the child, all while ignoring the fact that he had left me alone 2 days before I gave birth, that he had lied, betrayed, disappeared, and returned only when he realized what he stood to lose. Not one of them asked what I had gone through. Not one of them mentioned the hospital, the silence, the kiss, or the truth. It was all about his pain, his image, his rights. And as I read each message, I felt a cold certainty settle deeper inside me. I would not respond, I would not explain, I would not be dragged into defending the choices I made to protect my daughter. If he thought he could shame me into submission by sending a mob with his voice in their mouths, he was wrong. I had already survived far worse than his words. After that, I was even more convinced that Alex still didn't realize, truly, deeply, and honestly, that he had destroyed the family with his own hands, that he had shattered the trust we built and walked away at the most critical moment, and that no amount of revisionist storytelling or carefully orchestrated sympathy campaigns could undo what he had done. His messages, his silence when I gave birth, the kiss he tried to dismiss as nothing, and now this coordinated attack from people parroting his excuses, all of it proved to me that he hadn't taken responsibility for a single thing. And if he couldn't even see how his actions led us here, then he certainly wasn't capable of being the kind of father my daughter needed. That realization made something inside me harden in a way I didn't know was possible. Because if he couldn't tell the truth to himself, then there was no chance he would ever tell it to her. And I will not allow him to drag my daughter into a toxic story written out of guilt, nostalgia, or the twisted need to keep Claire, his past, tied to our future. My daughter doesn't deserve to grow up confused by loyalty to a man who couldn't show up for her when it mattered most. I refuse to let her be a character in the fiction he's trying to spin, and I will do everything in my power to keep her world rooted in honesty, safety, and love that never walks out the door. My lawyer has officially filed the documents for full custody, each page a step toward the future I now know I have to protect at all costs. We included everything: the timelines, the abandonment, the messages, the silence during birth, and the evidence of manipulation he tried to orchestrate through others. If Alex refuses to sign the waiver of parental rights, if he decides to turn this into a legal battle instead of facing the truth of what he's done, then we will fight in court. I'm not afraid of a courtroom, I'm not afraid of his excuses, and I'm not afraid of whatever performance he plans to put on for a judge. I'm ready. I'm ready to stand in front of anyone, anywhere, and tell the truth about what happened. I'm ready to speak for my daughter, who deserves a life without lies, without emotional instability, without being dragged into a legacy of guilt and dysfunction. I'm not doing this out of spite, I'm doing it because she is mine to protect, and because someone has to draw the line and say no more. I never wanted it to come to this, but if it has to, then I will walk into that courtroom with my head high, my heart clear, and a mother's unwavering resolve in my chest. Yesterday I received a message from Claire, one I didn't expect and honestly didn't need, but when I saw her name appear on my screen, I opened it without hesitation, curious more than anything else. She admitted without much fanfare or remorse that yes, they did kiss. There was no explanation, no apology, just a simple confirmation of what I had already known in my heart but now had in writing. And then she wrote something that almost made me laugh, a sentence so soaked in condescension and self-righteousness that I read it twice to make sure it was real. She said, "You have to let Alex be himself, not control him," as if betrayal was authenticity and loyalty was some form of oppression. At that moment I just smiled. Not out of bitterness, not out of pettiness, but because there was nothing left to grieve. I didn't need to know anything else. Every doubt, every quiet ache, every part of me that had once wondered if I had misunderstood, if I had acted too quickly, if I was being unfair, all of it vanished with that message. I was free. Truly, deeply, finally free. Free from the lies, the gaslighting, the mental gymnastics of loving someone who never knew how to love without conditions. And more importantly, I was free to begin again. I am ready now to start a new life with my daughter, a life rooted in honesty, peace, and self-respect, a life where we build something real, even if it's just the two of us at the beginning. I know it won't be easy, but I also know that it will be ours, and that every step forward will be a step away from the wreckage he left behind.